I'm a clinical assistant professor of dermatology and pediatrics at Northwestern University, Feinberg School of Medicine in Chicago, Illinois, and we're here in Chicago. Sure, I think it's the million-dollar question, or maybe the billion-dollar question, because it affects so many things, and it really ties into our understanding of the skin and its function and health and disease. But at its absolute root, I think we understand that there is a problem with the skin barrier. If there's one issue, it's the barrier, and that skin barrier, which is supposed to protect us from the outside world and keep water in, it becomes impaired and leaky. And then water can get out too easily, resulting in dry, itchy skin, allergens, irritants, pathogens, bacteria, fungi, all these things can get in an abnormal way and drive our immune system crazy. So that's kind of the deepest root cause, but then it sort of backs you up and say, well, why do you have a broken skin barrier? And we think part of that's genetic. There are some genes that really seem to help explain this. It's not perfect by any stretch. And there are certainly twins that one twin has it and one doesn't. So that's a real thing. This concordance rate is important. That tells us how much genes are playing a role. So they're playing a role, but certainly not the whole story. There's a big proportion of environment as well. We think that certain things in the environment, from pollutants, one of the most exciting stories, I think, is that in the wake of the California wildfires, there's been a huge uptick in atopic dermatitis. So that suggests that things in smoke, one of the things that's thought to play a role is this thing called diisocyanates. They actually are damaging the microbiome and probably also damaging the barrier. Those two are really closely related, and that may be playing a role for some people. We also know the gut is involved in this whole story, and the gut lining is very similar to the skin lining, right? If you trace your skin around your lips, now you're in the gut. It's the same epithelial surface in a way. I mean, they have different cells, but they're very similar. And so the gut lining breaks down. So all of these things are playing a role. Modern life, the foods we eat, the things we're exposed to, our genetic background, and even things that are, I think, harder to quantify, like stress, that plays a role too, and poor sleep. And so you put this together and you get a toxic soup that results in this terrible, vicious cycle of eczema. It's been an incredible number of new changes and ideas, and I think we're in the middle of this revolution. Some people are calling this the decade of eczema. We watch psoriasis go through this incredible renaissance with new ideas and new treatments, and sometimes I've heard this referred to as the virtuous cycle of drug development. So we have a disease, we maybe know something about it, but not that much, we're kind of crude, and then we get a medicine that helps define it, helps teach us something about it. That leads to a better understanding of the disease, which then leads to better medicines and so on. That's kind of how we bootstrap. And so we've seen this happen with psoriasis. It's been amazing. Like when there was an older commercial one of my teachers used to talk about on television that talked about the heartbreak of psoriasis. People just kind of suffered. They just didn't have much. We just couldn't do anything. And then now we have all these incredible treatments. Well, about 5 or 10 years ago, we really had very little for atopic dermatitis, and now we're finally getting some new things outside of the usual suspects. Just give everybody steroids or shut down everybody's immune system, which we know is not enough for basically anybody. It's really, except for the mildest patients who can use just a little bit, but we finally have some new understanding about what's causing it and better treatments. But it's painfully slow, especially for people suffering. It's like, why can't they figure this out? But as I often say, there is no they. This is the they. We're all part of the story. It's like, we're living it. There's not a secret. I mean, maybe there's a secret lab somewhere that somebody has all the answers, but I don't know about it. And to some degree, we kind of stumble along and we learn new lessons and we learn from each other, and there's a new medicine and we try it. And medicines fail. I wrote this paper a few years ago that was really amazing to look at all the treatment failures over the years. These are drugs that have sometimes billions of dollars poured into them, thousands of people working on them, investors, labs, all this, and then it just didn't work. And it's like, oh, okay, I guess we're going home. Like, that was it. It just died. It's gone. And we see this happen. So that's a powerful reminder that, it's not all a game. It's not all rigged. Somebody doesn't necessarily have all the answers. I mean, they're really, if you look for them, I think the natural thing we do is we kind of refine that story and we kind of don't talk about the failures and just focus on the successes. So it looks like it's been smooth, but it's really, really rocky terrain. I think one of the biggest unmet needs for us in most inflammatory conditions, but in particular atopic dermatitis, is to have non-steroidal anti-inflammatory treatments that can help break the cycle of disease help relieve the itch, get people better, and not cause all of the same kind of side effects that we've seen with steroids. So the best news is that we finally have a treatment armamentarium. Is it great? No, it's good. It's the beginning. Do I need still more things? Yes, I need every single new thing. I need a whole bunch of things, and I still have a long list of unmet needs, but it's a start. And definitely before 2017, we had a heck of a lot less to do. So now I'm excited to say that there are more things to try. Some of the new biologic agents and a whole bunch more in the pipeline, some of the new oral medicines, some new topicals, a couple of really exciting ones that are in the pipeline as well. So I really think that for now even, we don't have to rely on steroids nearly as much as we had to. And in the future, I'm hoping there will be a future where literally you can say to a patient, yeah, we don't have to do any steroids. We're just going to go a non-steroidal route, and we have different approaches, and that would only be if everything else is failing or only in a certain kind of situation, and that would be an exciting future. Most really good clinicians who've had a lot of experience with atopic derm patients now are aware of it. So that's good. So that was the first hurdle, saying it and people just giving you a blank look. What are you talking about? I think now there's some awareness. Now the next phase is getting people over sort of the skepticism of it. And I do think it's good to be skeptical of things. We have to have a healthy skepticism, and there are other situations I think that have been, that have been sort of taken to the wrong direction, or people use them for their own ends. So we have to be careful. But I do think that there is an increasing acceptance, I'm happy to say, and more people reaching out to me saying, listen, I don't know that much about it. Can you tell me about it? That's a huge breakthrough. Are there still people that sort of turn up their nose and say, I don't think this is real? Yes, but that's kind of true for everything. I mean, in the real world, we have people denying, you name it, right? You go on the internet, you'll find people who don't believe the earth is round. They don't believe, So at some point, I don't think we can ever go for perfection, but if we can get a critical mass of dermatologists who say, okay, I think there's something here, we have a lot of unanswered questions around it, but if at least they will entertain it and start talking about it, I'd say that's a huge victory. That's worth celebrating. Yes, I think it's hard for people to change in general, right? The older you get, the more you work with people, you realize it's very difficult to change, and present company included. You have a certain structure of ideas. You've built your house on concepts of how things work, and it's very tough, especially when fundamental changes happen, right? I think we see this all the time. So we have a way of thinking about the condition and a way of approaching it, and especially people that aren't as interested in it. I think if you're really passionate about a subject and you read about it and you're working on it, you're much more malleable. I think we have a group of people that want to learn about this and want to change it. But if it's just another thing you have to deal with, it's kind of like, what's the update? Just tell me what to do. I don't really want to deal with it. This works fine. I don't need to spend any more time and energy on this. And I think it does dovetail with this idea of burnout too. People are exhausted. If you look at a doctor today versus a doctor just even 10 years ago, let alone 20 or 30 years ago, the amount of bureaucracy, of paperwork, of pressures, it's crazy. It's completely different. It's not even the same profession anymore. My patients, they joke. They're like, I bet you never did this in medical school. I'm like, did it? We didn't even talk about it. This was a complete blindside that most of my day is talking to insurance company administrators and begging for medicines that are medically necessary. It's crazy. The whole thing is nuts. And so this is really change it. And I think, of course, it's taken a toll on education because people don't have time or energy. They're dispirited and they just want to basically go home and rest after a day of patient care, which is largely dealing with insurance companies and bureaucratic stuff and billing people, and patients mad because the bill came through wrong and, hey, this is a surprise bill. And the doctor's like, I just checked the box. I don't know. Nobody told me about this. This was not supposed to be how this went, but that's the reality of where we're at. So all of these things come into play, I think, with changing people, and it's really, really tough, especially when you only have a tiny sliver of time and energy to do it, which is why I think we need to use all the tools in our toolbox, from videos to gaming that can allow us to do these, what they call serious games, to actually engage in a way that might be different for people, to play with these ideas and learn about them, to webinars where patients can talk to them from a different perspective, to support groups, all of these different approaches, not just always relying on a paper and a journal, because that can only take us so far. I think most dermatologists and most doctors in general are pretty curious. I think to really do medicine and do it well and to stay with it, you realize, yes, maybe at some point it looked glamorous. It was like, oh, doctors, they have an easy life, they play golf, they're rich. I think that's not been the case for at least my entire generation. Like we hear the stories, but I watch it like everybody else on TV, like in the 1950s. But that's never how I've seen any doctor that I've learned from or been. I don't play golf. There's no time to play golf. We're usually running around. But I think that there is a lot of curiosity for many people, but I do think there is a limit to that, and there's just a bandwidth problem as well. We're just completely overloaded, and there's so many things happening in medicine at all times in so many different disease states, even within dermatology. Can you imagine? Even for us, it's hard to keep up on psoriasis, lichen planus, hidradenitis suppurativa, alopecia areata, all of the immune changes, all of the new drugs, their side effects, how to counsel about them. Like, that's all happening. Then imagine if you're a family practitioner. That's one tiny little sliver, and then you have to think about what's new in blood pressure, what's new about lipids, what's new about cancer, what's new about screening, what's new about vaccines, what do we have, like, all of these things. I can't even imagine how somebody can keep all of these things even remotely current when we think about all the other pieces and pressures we're dealing with as well. So I don't think for most people it's a lack of curiosity. I think it's just a lack of bandwidth. Yeah, I think there's a spectrum, like anything else. We'll kind of see that bell curve type thing. And to me, the most interesting question often is where's the center of the curve? So our goal is to move enough people to get that center of the curve to saying, okay, this is real, this is important, this is not something we dismiss or laugh at. I mean, that's terrible when people are just like totally dismissive, saying this is a bunch of baloney. It's like that. And I think fortunately, I think the curve has shifted enough that part's gone for most. But there are tails of the curve. There are people who are staunchly opposed to the whole thing and think it's all manufactured, and then there's people on the other side who blame everything on steroids. I've honest to goodness have had patients who say, I think this is TSW or something like that, and they hadn't used steroids. And I'm like, wait a minute, what? And they're like, well, I used steroids before I had the baby, so I wonder if it's, and I'm like, that might be too far. That might be a little bit a bridge too far for even me. And I think there's just fear that can push us too far extreme, or blaming everything on it. I stubbed my toe. Could that have been from the topical steroids I used in the 80s? I don't think so. I think you may have just stubbed your toe, or this other thing may have happened. So like anything else, we'll see extremes, and trying to find out where that middle is, and also try to know the truth, because honest to goodness, there are cases in history where the extreme people that we thought were crazy, they were right. So you can't be too dismissive even of those extremes. I think you have to be open-minded enough, but it is interesting to see where the majority of people are thinking. I think the only way to move forward is good communication, working together. I think one of the biggest problems in society right now we're seeing, and this is across everything, politics especially, is just the loss of good faith, right? Of sort of, you see somebody do something and the assumption is that guy's out to get me. That guy has a malignant intent. Once we do that, I think we're doomed. Like, I don't think you can have a good faith discussion. So I think we have to have a little bit of faith in each other that your doctor is really trying to help you. And again, are 100% of doctors trying to help you 100% of the time? No, I'm not that naive. But do I think the vast majority of doctors are really in it to try to help people? Yes, I really do. And I think they're honestly aligned with getting their patients better in a healthy way. We have to believe that, otherwise we're doomed. And I have to believe that patients are really trying to take good care of themselves, do the right thing by themselves, obviously not hurt themselves or their family members, but they also want to get better, right? So if we have this alignment, I think we're going to do much better. Part of it is also on us to get some criteria. We want to put together some real definitions of the disease, because if it stays too nebulous and it's sort of like, well, it could be any amount of exposure for any amount of time, it could really be a lot of different things. It can kind of look like eczema, but it doesn't have to. There's 60 different subtypes. You'll never, like, that turns everybody off. The room just says, okay, well, you guys are, you're not ready. You're not ready for this yet. You're talking too many crazy things. So I think we need to focus like a laser and say, this is what we think defines it. This is what we're looking for. These are the clues. When you put that out there, I think people can feel empowered. Then the clinicians say, oh, okay, I know what to look for. Oh, you have that escalating, and this is just an example. One of my favorite ideas is that escalating pattern of steroid need. You need more and more and more. To me, that's one of the earliest red flags where I would say, ooh, I don't like where we're going. We're going the wrong direction. That doesn't mean you have TSW at that point. Ideally, we're before it, right? We don't want to get to that point. But that's the kind of signal I think that good clinicians will then latch onto. And if we can make that little tiny change, if somebody keeps needing more and more, we stop, we might do much better than trying to kind of bully people to believe in something or not believe in something. There are fortunately many things we can do that are non-steroidal for patients. Everything from, of course, the very basic things, right? Avoiding known triggers. If something bothers your skin, irritates your skin, be that a cleanser, be that a fabric, hot weather, all those kinds of things, trying to minimize that. Easy peasy, costs nothing, right? piece of cake. Good moisturization, right? For most patients, again, I don't think 100% for anybody, but for most patients, good moisturizer use really does make a big difference. It seems to help. Finding the one that they like, finding one that's cosmetically elegant. I want it to be, it should feel good. It should be a good thing. That's a great thing. Using gentle cleansers, right? We know that harsh soaps and things that are alkaline can damage the skin barrier, damage the microbiome. We want to be careful. So I like gentle things, oil-based cleansers. I think that's really nice. We can help restore the skin and moisturizing right after. Good education around what to expect. So if people say, listen, if I have just a little bit of a flare-up and I'm not too uncomfortable, maybe just cooling it down, moisturizing, a cool compress, that might get me through it. I don't even need a medicine. Great. My goal, again, I'm blessed. I'm so busy I can't keep up with my clinical practice. I never advertise. I don't want any more patients. My dream, I always tell my patients, my dream is that you will just be so much better that you'll remember me fondly. Oh, that guy was great. He helped me a few years ago. I don't need him anymore. I don't need any treatment. That's the goal, right? I don't need any more patients. I don't want any more business. I don't want to give any more drugs out to anybody. I want everybody better. So to get there, I want to leverage all of those kinds of things. And then, of course, we have non-pharmacologic things that we use. Some of my different oils. I'm interested in a lot of botanical approaches, my integrative approaches, things like coconut oil and sunflower seed oil. Taking things like hemp oil by mouth can also help from the inside. So I have all my little tricks that I use. We also have things like phototherapy. I use a lot of phototherapy, the healing power of light. It's amazing. It's not a drug, but it does a lot. It helps the inflammation. It helps the itch. It boosts your vitamin D. It has probably a very direct effect in your microbiome. So these are amazing things we can do all without picking up a prescription pad, right? All of these things are literally just doing it without drugs. And then when we get into the drug realm, if we need to, if we're still saying, gosh, we're still suffering, well, we have tons of non-steroidal agents, from our calcineurin inhibitors like tacrolimus and pimecrolimus, to crisaborole, our phosphodiesterase 4 inhibitor, to some of the new biologic agents, dupilumab, tralokinumab, another one, lebrikizumab, coming to those really powerful JAK inhibitors, the topical one, which is really a powerful one, ruxolitinib, and then the two oral ones, which are even more powerful, some of the most powerful drugs I've ever seen in dermatology. They're quite impressive, and that's upadacitinib and abrocitinib. So we have a lot of different things, and the pipeline is even crazier. There's like 20 things coming soon. So it is a lot to juggle. All of those, not a single one of the things I mentioned is a steroid or a steroid cousin or related to a steroid in any way, shape, or form, and that's pretty exciting, right? Yes, the guideline situation has been troublesome because, in a way, it's kind of an embarrassment of riches because we have so many new things coming out, and they're coming out at such a pace that literally they can't get the groups together. The guidelines, read them. Sometimes people are kind of dismissive of them. They're like, oh, it's a bunch of people sitting in a room and just telling what they think. It turns out it's actually way more complex. They do all of these. They do deep data search. They have these Delphi methods where everybody's kind of agreeing or disagreeing. They go into detail. They're really stringent about them, even though I think the final product often does seem sort of simple or obvious to some degree. I get it. You read it, it's like, okay, it's the usual, but it really is a powerful consensus, and it does take a ton of time. That being said, the hardest part is when there's new drugs, everybody suddenly says, well, where does this fit in? Can you make a new guideline? And then the guideline group's like, but we just finished. Like, it takes a year to do this or whatever. So that has been a problem. There are a number of them that are in development. Some of them have been recently released. The new European guidelines came out, and those are a very good stopgap, but even those now, the new drugs coming and that have just been released, they're not always on there. So this is a little bit of the cat and mouse game, but I still think the beauty of the guidelines is that the general approach is still valid. And in fact, in my talks, I often will use the guidelines from 10 years ago as my structure, and I'll just kind of fill in the blanks and say, well, here's a couple of the new treatments and where they fit in. But the basic concept is this therapeutic ladder. We're going to start as simple as we can with minimal medications, or none if we can, and then slowly work our way up appropriately to get the patient better, but using the least amount of medication in the safest way possible. So I think in some ways we kind of see that just continue to build on itself, but the next 5 or 10 years are going to be a little messy because we're going to have new treatments that don't fit in. Yes, I think it's very easy to say something or make a conjecture or something that seems reasonable and really, really, really hard to prove it. Sometimes it takes years and years and years. It's hilarious. Sometimes I get like a morning newspaper of a lot of the articles that I'm interested in dermatology, and they'll have little digests, and I'll click on it and read the paper. And so many of them sound absolutely ridiculous. It'll be like, study suggests that topical tacrolimus may actually help with eczema. You're like, it's been FDA approved for eczema since the year 2000. This is a 23-year-old drug. But that's literally how science will often work. It keeps testing and retesting and proving it and looking at it. And so it is a very slow process to fill that out and get the, sort of all those pieces of the puzzle so people feel really good about something. And it can take literally decades. Whereas you're right, a clinician might try something, or a patient especially, an anecdotal experience can be so powerful, right? We're humans. We love stories. We love those anecdotes. It's like, well, that didn't work for me. It's a bunch of baloney. Or that worked great for me. That must be the secret. And then that's why it takes 1 second to do that, and then a long time to really prove it or disprove it. I mean, what was the quote? I think it was Thomas Edison. It's 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration. I've been counting them up a little bit. I probably have in total a few hundred patients that I've seen in the last couple of years. Many of those patients really will do one visit with me. They'll do consultation, and a lot of them are through telemedicine. So I don't necessarily get a lot of follow-up on them, but I probably have on the order of about 100 that I've been following with a little more closely, and several hundred that I've seen in the last few years total. I definitely think that TSW is underreported. I definitely think that most clinicians aren't even paying attention to it or thinking about it yet. That being said, it is one of the most interesting things I've ever seen in medicine or dermatology, in that the patient organization has been incredible, and that advocacy has really come completely from within. So I think that is a notable thing. I have almost no other disease in my entire spectrum. We see a lot of diseases in dermatology, right? I mean, many diseases. I think I read a paper once. I couldn't find it. I was looking for the paper, but couldn't find it in the literature, but they were comparing the number of diagnoses that different specialists entertain, and dermatology is near the top. We just have a lot of it's benign things, but we have a name for everything. Oh, that's a Campbell de Morgan spot. That's a milium. That's we have all these little things. And so the number of diagnoses are huge. There's almost nothing I've ever seen like this, where the patients tend to come in and tell me that's what they have. And what's remarkable is, at least in my experience, almost every single one who said that, and I mean this honestly with no ego or anything, they've been correct. Like, it's not like I'm trying to please them, because I think if a patient really didn't have it, I would say, I don't think this really is my conception of it. And that's happened a couple times, but the vast majority, I'm like, yeah, I really think you're right. Like, you're not making this up. This is not manufactured. Like, I really think you're onto something, which makes it that much more frustrating too, because we can't seem to quite define it. We've been really working hard to make a diagnostic criteria, and it's really slippery. So we're not giving up, but it is remarkable to see that. It's been really tough. And I think when we started as a small group, we were much easier. We were close. Probably if we kept it small, we would be published already. Once we brought in a few more people, these opinions change and people's comfort level, and I'm not comfortable putting that out there. That makes me nervous. I don't know. So you realize it's this, it's the bell curve. And so as we get further out, it's tougher to get everybody to agree. I'm hoping we're still going to put something out, because we put a lot of work into it, even if it's just sort of these are the building materials. These are sort of the raw materials for maybe putting together a diagnostic criteria. Maybe our group won't do it at this point, but even if we could put some of the ideas out, that may help the next group or us in the future to do that. I think the other thing that's been really hard is that patients, when they bring it up to certain clinicians, they get dismissed completely and shut down. And so we're seeing this problem where people have to see multiple people, and they're having trouble finding a provider home. And that makes everything much harder, because I think it also has an effect on the way they tell their story. They become more defensive, they become more angry. And I start a lot of visits where people are really frustrated and mad and kind of skeptical of me. And I'm happy to deal with it, but it's really hard, because you're like, wow, like, I could tell you've been hurt. Like, you're in this room, you're not just saying, hey doc, what do you think? They're now defensive, and that's tough. And I feel like that, as a specialty, we have to work on fixing that whole piece. The biggest hurdle is that it is very difficult to distinguish it from severe atopic dermatitis. And that's the hard part, because they both can be red, they can be scaly, they can be itching and burning and painful, they can have tons of body involvement that changes over time. All of these different pieces, even some of the swelling, sometimes we'll talk about this elephant skin type change, that can sort of be seen, a version of that in bad eczema, potentially. Here's the other problem. how many times did we think that it was bad eczema, but it actually was TSW? So then we have this problem of really nosology, putting its name on it. How do we name it correctly? How do we define it? So this is a tricky piece too, where people have a memory of it, and then I'm thinking, well, maybe your memory is actually of this other condition, and you've sort of just been lumping them together. To me, though, honestly, it's less important if we just listen to the patient and be careful with our steroids. I think, honestly, it could be one of those conditions where if we just change our practice, we could make it obsolete or largely obsolete. And to me, that is really something that I try to do no matter what. For any patient, I try to minimize or avoid steroids whenever I can. I try to lean on these other techniques. And I think that by doing so, we really have a much, much less likely chance of happening. Is it zero? No, I do think some people have a tiny steroid exposure and develop this. I really do. But some people take a Tylenol and hurt their liver. I mean, there's risks. You cross the street, you get hit by a car. I mean, honest to God, at some point, if you could drive yourself crazy with risk, but you have to sort of say, okay, there's some risks that are inherent. I have to get out of the house, I have to deal with some level of risk on these things. And it would be sad to say, well, I mean, there are times in history we say, well, we're just not doing any of that anymore. We could just say, no more dermatologists, no more skin treatment. I mean, I guess that would be a solution. Then there'd be no more TSW if we got rid of steroids and all the treatments. But I think there'd be a lot of suffering. I think that people would eventually recapitulate and say, maybe we do need some help. Maybe this wasn't all from steroids. Maybe the whole of society's ills were from other things too, and we do need some help. So, you can throw out the baby with the bathwater. It's tempting sometimes, right? There are institutions that we think maybe are beyond rescuing, but I don't think this is one of those situations. I do think that with working together, we can help the majority of people. That being said, do I still think people are going to get hurt from medicines? Yes. It comes with the territory. It stinks. It's hard. Part of why it's hard being a doctor. You know that some percentage of people, try as you might with the best intention, they're going to have a bad effect, or they're not going to get better, right? Sometimes it's not as bad as they're going to have a terrible side effect. But I'm like, I think this is going to work for you. I think this is going to help. And they call me in a few weeks and say, Doc, I'm still miserable. And you're like, oh, now I've wasted your time and your money and your hope, and your good faith to try something. That sucks. I mean, I carry that with me every day, and I try as might to get everybody better. I can't. No, the most I've been doing, honestly, have been trying to look at sort of what's been published. We've written up some of my patient experience, what I've seen in my own practice. We've really tried to put together this diverse group of different clinicians, including a traditional Chinese medicine herbalist and some other folks, to really try to define the disease better, to try to get some criteria or some characteristics so that we can empower people to figure out when this might be happening or to avoid it, ideally. I mean, that's really the goal. But in terms of the underlying biochemistry, there are some papers that are being discussed right now and some studies being discussed right now that I've heard about, where they're trying to recruit patients to do more biopsies, to do more studies. So I think that'll be huge. That will be big. And again, this is that Overton window concept. The discussion window is now allowing for this to be taking place, and that is opening the door for the science people, the lab people. I'm not a lab type doctor, I'm a clinician and I do some clinical studies and reviews, but the lab people, once they say, okay, this is real, we got to study it, then we can move things forward. I mean, there are people like saying literally, I'm afraid to put this out. I don't, because the dangerous part is if we overcall it, then you have a group of people saying, I don't want to use any treatment or any steroids, and then you have people suffering, and that backfires too, you don't want to see suffering. I mean, I meet families and patients where they're so afraid to treatment that they let their eczema just keep raging. And if you're an adult, then I feel bad for you, but it's certainly your choice. I'm not going to push it on you. It's really hard when it's a little kid, because now you're like, the kid is crying, the kid is not sleeping, the kid is maybe not developing properly, and the parents are so afraid of the treatment, they don't want to do anything. And I get it. I don't think this is mysterious at all. It makes perfect sense. But to me, the counter argument is this. With any treatment, yes, there are risks. There are real, measurable risks. But one thing I can tell you is that right now in this room, you're suffering from atopic dermatitis. That's a sure thing. That's 100%. So this I know. This is truth. So everything else we're talking about are possibilities. And I think that's this whole point, risk-benefit ratio. You get on a roller coaster at a theme park, there is a very low risk of getting hurt and a very high risk of having fun, but it's not zero. You could get hurt, something bad could happen, right? Risk-benefit ratio. So we do this every single day. When you eat that cookie, when you eat that, sweet treat, it's not the best thing for you, but the risk-benefit ratio in that moment, it's not good for my health. Maybe I shouldn't do that. Maybe it's not good for my skin, because a lot of my patients tell me if they're eating more processed foods, junk foods, right? Those things can make them flare up. I think that's real, but the pleasure of that in that moment. So we take risks all the time. And so I just want to try to keep us centered in that concept that if we go overboard, I think it can become destructive with if anything else. This is one of those conditions that really has a powerful mind-body connection. And for many patients, it's another vicious cycle within a series of vicious cycles. This is a disease of cycles. And so the mind piece is interesting because we know that when you are stressed out, be it not sleeping well, psychological stress, pressure from exams. I see patients who are moving. They're like, I'm getting ready to move. It's so stressed. Their skin tends to get worse. And they have actually measured this. There are studies that show when you're under psychological stress, your skin barrier starts to break down. That's part one. Part two is that, of course, when your skin is bad and you're itchy and uncomfortable, you're not sleeping, right? Or you're not sleeping well, you're stressed about your skin. Well, holy cow, right? We have the cycle. The skin is causing stress. The stress is causing skin problems, so they are in this vicious loop. We also know that part of dealing with the disease is handling all of these pieces and feeling all these feelings and the itch and the distraction and the fatigue. And so sometimes I'll say to a patient, I would love to have somebody help support you. It's not necessarily to help get your eczema better, although I do think that can happen, but I just feel like you're overwhelmed with your skin and you need some support. And so that's not saying it's all in their head. It's not saying that they're crazy, but it is saying that the disease has a huge psychological burden. And it's not that I also don't want to keep fixing the problems best we can, but as you know, we have limits. Again, I wish I could just magic wand it, but sometimes patients do have some residual stuff. So getting some psychological support, getting some tools in their toolbox for that can be hugely helpful. One of my favorite things is hypnotherapy. So I refer a number of my patients for hypnosis. It's incredibly relaxing. It's empowering because then they have a tool that they can use. The person that I work with most should actually give them kind of a recording. So whenever they're feeling it, they can put on their headphones or their AirPods and just go back into it. And that can really help. It can help them with sleep. It can help them with the anxiety around the disease. And I think for some patients, it actually even helps their skin very directly. The gut, it plays such a critical role in health and disease, and it is so intimately connected to the skin. As we said, when you follow your skin around your lips, you're in your gut. So, it really is part of it's part of the same group of epithelial barriers, right? We have our skin, we have our gut, we have our respiratory epithelial. So all of these barriers are important, and we know that the gut leakiness, the amount of damage that the lining has, is actually quite correlated to the skin disease. They are reflections of each other. And there was a neat study a few years ago that showed that the more severe the eczema, the more severe the leaky gut. When they gave patients some probiotics, it did seem to help a little bit too. So part of our challenge is figuring out what can we do to help heal the gut, because we think that both gut and skin are related. I do think that our toolbox is much more limited for the gut at this point. I'm hoping in the future, and I'm working with some really interesting startup companies that have big ideas here, so stay tuned. But right now, I feel like we're kind of limited. I do recommend probiotics essentially for all of my patients. I think they're helpful, but I think they're sort of unreliable. And when you really look at the evidence with a skeptical eye, right, a good skeptical eye, you're like, this isn't quite as clear as some people make it sound. Because I've listened to speakers tell these compelling stories like, clearly this is gut, this is an overgrowth of X, Y, and Z, and an undergrowth of X, Y, and Z, and so we give this combination and this fancy probiotic, which stays in the refrigerator and only costs $150 a month, this is going to fix it. And I'm like, so much confidence. Like, where did you get that confidence from? Oh, I see a lot of patients. Do you see thousands of bad eczema patients like me? I don't know if you really do. And do you follow up with all of them? Or maybe the patients who it doesn't help because it's so expensive, they just sort of disappear and come see me? I don't know, because I take insurance, so we're kind of sort of the lowest point, right? You can come see me no matter what. And I think that could be a little bit of a bias going in and a little bit of self-promotion I hear sometimes. And I'm cautious about it. Optimistic. And for all the patients who come back and say, hey, that worked for me, I say, God love you, that's great, but I also ask that you show some compassion for the people who it didn't work for, right? And the same I would say for dietary change. Some people say, it's just diet, you guys are a bunch of baloney, all you have to do is change your diet. Great, then do it, do it. But I'm telling you from real honest experience that patients come in and they're sobbing because they've tried 6 months or a year of drastic diet changes, sometimes hurting themselves or the child, if they're taking care of their kid, and they say, I swear it didn't work. And I say, it's okay, you can let go. Like, it's for everybody, it's not diet. I wish it were, but I also think we have to look back in history. It'd be hard to argue that the ancient Egyptians ate a lot of processed food, right? Relative to maybe living literally with nature, yes, I agree, because they had beer and they had, but they're pretty good. and they describe eczema in the Ebers Papyrus. So it's hard for me to imagine it's all food. And of course, we know that animals get skin disease as well. So just trying to think outside of that box. Dogs have a lot of eczema. Animals, even in the wild, get skin diseases and problems. So it's like, I don't know if there is such a perfect diet or a perfect state. Maybe there is. Maybe, but I don't know if we can attain it. And it's very tough to attain it when you also want to have your smartphone and you also want to be able to jump in your car and turn on the radio. It's like, maybe there's some Eden-like state. I dream of it. It'd be wonderful. But I don't think we're going to attain that in this life. And even if an individual wanted it, we're all on this spaceship Earth together. So there's people with factories, there's smoke and pollution. There's even wildfires, which that's pretty natural, right? Wildfires have presumably been with us from the very beginning, right? Forests catch on fire, lightning strikes and starts it. So people have been exposed to this kind of smoke, and if that's able to do it, it's really hard to avoid everything unless you're in a bubble. If it worked, I think people would do it. And again, that doesn't mean it never works, and it doesn't mean there aren't people for whom diet made a big change. I'm jealous. I'm so jealous of them. I wish I could give that to all my patients. I wish it worked for everybody. But I can guarantee you, truthfully, that I've had many, many, many hundreds of patients that have tried extreme diet. Now, you can always, there's a game you can play. You can always say, oh, you didn't do it long enough. You didn't try. You weren't pure enough, right? This purity test. And maybe it's true, but I also think that at some point it becomes untenable for a patient. So what do you say? If I told everybody you can't watch television, you can't be on your smartphone, you need to do 6 miles of running per day and eat celery juice, and maybe. But most people, I think, would say, I can't, or I don't want to, or I'm not able to. So there could be some upper limit where it is, but I think that it really has to be practical for most people who have to actually go to work and sometimes have to get, a reheated meal or order in because they don't have much time to eat. I think if you can't encapsulate some of that, at least, to me, it's not a workable problem, at least for some people. And for those who it is, I'm so lucky. I'm so happy for you, right? You're so lucky. I feel this great benefit that you don't need us. This is great. You don't go play, go do something great with the world. You don't need to be here. Social media, I think, has been an important thing for our generation here. I think we're seeing a lot of effects. There have been a lot of bad things people talk about. It can be polarizing. It can push people into depression. It's increased anxiety in a lot of the kids. But I do think there's a positive side too. I think it's empowered patients. I think it's given people an ability to communicate with a broad swath of individuals that they normally wouldn't be able to see and talk to, and create some of these online movements that I truly believe have been helpful. So like anything else, any other tool, good and bad, but in my experience, it's been mostly for the good. It's gotten awareness out and education out, and it's really helped this movement. I think without social media, without the internet, this wouldn't be a discussion. And maybe in some ways, this is one of the most modern diseases because it really did rely on the internet for it to come about. So a biologic drug, and we have many of them, they really refer to something that has been produced by a living organism. And so there are a number of ways this can happen. Typically, they have cells, like yeast cells, that are modified to produce something that we can then use in the body to create an outcome. And what's remarkable is when I was a medical student many, many years ago, the discussion was about synthesizing drugs, so synthetic drugs, using organic chemistry into building these things. And the idea was we're going to figure out all the secrets. We're going to be able to make anything we want. And the truth is, it's really hard to do that. And so people were very smart and said, you know who can do this way better than we can? Mother Nature. Mother Nature's figured all of this out. We can harness the power of, in particular, it turns out not all biologics are this, but the way we use it in modern times, and especially in atopic derm, we tend to be referring to biologics that are antibodies against certain targets. So we know part of our immune system is making billions and billions of antibodies. They help protect us from bacteria and viral infections, and they're doing all these functions in the body. They're little proteins. They're kind of shaped like the letter Y. They float around. They break down naturally. They don't go through our kidneys. They're really amazing. Now, they can cause trouble, right? When we think about something like lupus. Lupus, in part, is an autoimmune condition, meaning your immune system now starts to attack parts of you, right? So they can do some bad things too, but typically in a healthy person, they're just doing their job. So the idea is you can raise an antibody to a specific target. And with some of the biologics we have, like dupilumab, tralokinumab, soon to come lebrikizumab, these actually are raised to parts of the receptor for some of these different inflammatory cell messengers. So the idea is the cells are sending these inflammation messages, some of the numbers you've probably heard, interleukin 4, interleukin 13, IL-4, IL-13, interleukin 31, the master itch cytokine. They send these little messages, and then that of course triggers these responses: inflammation, itch, swelling, all this stuff, barrier damage. So what if you could just block the signal? You could just say, no. And that's literally what these things do. These tiny little antibodies block it. And so when that messenger comes, it's like, nope, talk to the hand. And so you don't send that inflammation signal. Now, does it totally shut it off? No, it just kind of dampens it down. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. I mean, there's still activity, in different parts of the body and so on and so forth. And can it cause trouble? Absolutely. There are potential side effects from these things. But when it's very targeted, like in the case of the ones that we have right now for atopic dermatitis, the side effects are really pretty small because they're only messing with one teeny tiny little part of the immune system. And because it's a biologic, it's an antibody, it doesn't push stress on your liver. It doesn't interact with other drugs. It doesn't go through your kidneys. It's not like a medicine in a way. It's just doing this thing and then it kind of breaks down naturally. So they're pretty amazing. And again, I think that, Mother Nature deserves the credit for it. This is something that really, it can't really be invented by people in the normal way. They just had to just kind of discover it and refine it. And that's why I think it's kind of miraculous. And we're seeing these biologic medicines used in tons of diseases: arthritis, ulcerative colitis, psoriasis, cancers. People are raising it to different parts of cancer. So trying to understand this. And finally, we have atopic dermatitis. So that's really what we're talking about when we talk about biologics. So dupilumab, the generic name for Dupixent, the drug, is a antibody that binds to the IL-4 receptor alpha, one part of the receptor for IL-4, and it turns out that that's shared for both IL-4 and IL-13, two of the big ones that seems to drive inflammation and itch and skin barrier damage, kind of all three of those things. In general, very well tolerated medicine. And now I have a lot of firsthand experience. I have a lot of patients who've been on it or who are currently on it. But there are some important side effects. The first is, because it is a protein, it can cause an allergic reaction in some people. That's been described. And it can even be a bad allergic reaction, although fortunately pretty rare. We think it's far less than 1% of people. But that is something we have to make sure people are aware of. And sometimes that can happen over time. Where they've been tolerating it fine, then suddenly it's like, oh, my body doesn't like this now, just like with foods or other things, so that can happen. Number two is that it can cause an injection site reaction. So where you do the shot, if it's belly or your thigh, it can get red and swollen. And I've had some people be like, it's really painful. And sometimes, rarely, it can be painful enough to I don't want to keep going. And I'm like, okay, we have to make a change. Usually it's more mild, but it sucks. I mean, it's unpleasant. For some people, they can get this eye involvement. And so the most common version of this is just conjunctivitis. So redness, swelling, it looks like you're allergic, when you're rubbing your eyes, are almost like pink eye. And for most patients, it's fairly mild and they're able to get through it. But a few of my patients, it's been so bad that we've literally had to stop the drug. I'm like, oh, and usually they're really sad. They're like, my skin is doing so great. My eyes are driving me crazy. So we'll often work with ophthalmology. We'll try some different treatments to get them better. And sometimes, again, they can get through it. Sometimes it's just artificial tears or some non-steroidal drops or something like that, or even an antihistamine type thing. But for some patients, no matter what we do, it's like we have to stop. So that's unfortunate. Now, usually that is non-permanent, non-damaging. I've had some patients come in and say, I'm afraid to go blind. And I'm like, oh my gosh, wait, that's not this kind of eye issue, right? Thankfully, because there are certain types of eye issues that could cause trouble. This one, it's really very superficial. But we still have to deal with it. And if you don't treat it, if you let it keep going, you could hurt your eyes permanently. If you keep rubbing your eyes and having that inflammation, that's not good. There is a group of people that get this face and neck flare-up. So their body clears up, and either their face and neck doesn't clear, or in my experience, more commonly, their face and neck were actually not bad, and now they're starting to flare up. And it's like, what is this? Why is this happening? So some people think it's an overgrowth of this yeast, this Malassezia yeast, and I think sometimes that may be the case. Sometimes it's almost more like rosacea. Sometimes it may be a contact dermatitis. Sometimes I think it's TSW emerging, that it's being a refractory area. So we don't know. And again, sometimes I can get it better, sometimes I can't get it better and I have to stop the drug. And usually once we stop the drug, it settles down. So it seems like it's related to the medicine. So those are some of the things. Obviously, if you start reading, with any medicine, now this has been given to, it's like well over 100,000, maybe it's over 250,000 people or something. A lot of people have gotten this drug. Once you get to those numbers, then you start seeing a lot of reports of anything. So you could pretty much go into the, the literature and say, I'm looking for dupilumab that causes X, Y, or Z. Everything's been described and it will continue to, and you can do that for almost any drug. So, but less and less and less frequently, and then more tenuously. It's like, was this really related? I don't know. One that's coming up maybe is some arthritis or arthralgia, joint pain. And I think there probably is something to that, but the question is it maybe in a certain group? Is there maybe an underlying issue? So we don't know. But that's the truth with a lot of new medicines. You keep learning. And we still learn stuff about things like ibuprofen that have been out for decades, right? We still learn. And so the FDA is pretty strict. They're like, you can never stop learning. You can never stop reporting. And as you get new reports, you have to put those out there. And I think companies hate it, and doctors kind of hate it too, because it's more and more to talk about in a visit. And sometimes at the end of a visit, when you think this is the right medicine for a patient, you've gone over so much safety stuff, the patient's like, no thanks, I'll just take my chances, right? It sounds so scary. So that's the balance, trying to find the balance. And also, I think as humans, it's really tough to think about lower risk events. Like, we're not good at that. You hear about a risk and it's like, I don't want to do it. But as we talked about earlier, I think just crossing the street, just being in Chicago, my city, I love this city. It's a dangerous city. Stuff happens. There's violence, there's auto accidents, there's crazy things. So, I mean, there really is a small risk to just leaving your house. So I think we have to put all that in perspective when we talk about this. Again, especially for the benefit. I would never say we should put this in the water. This is not for everybody, right? Good Lord, no. This is for a group of patients that has tried a bunch of things, that are still really suffering, that are really 100% having a rough time because of their skin disease. That's guaranteed. Then we're going to try something for them. Yes, in general, the biologic class, and again, we have a lot of examples like in psoriasis and arthritis, some of them have been out for decades, they seem to be pretty safe in the long term. And that's the other cool thing. They don't seem to have these kind of effects or side effects that accrue over time. We're still learning though, I always say that, and dupilumab, for example, is the oldest one for atopic derm. That came out in 2017. So it's a pretty good amount of time, but it's not that long. So we're still learning. The good thing is each time they do more tests, we get to kind of retest those assumptions and look. And of course, dupilumab was first approved in adults, then approved in adolescents, then little kids, and now basically down to 6 months of age. So that's kind of a big deal. And one of my favorite things is when I'm talking to even an adult, I'll say, they actually have now approved this down to babies, down to 6 months. And you see them sometimes visibly relax. It's like, oh, okay, all right. And I agree, it's nice, something that actually is passing muster in little kids, which is a big risk. It's scary, so that's why the FDA is so protective of little kids. You kind of have to go slowly. You can't just jump into it. But little by little, it's like, okay, I think it's pretty safe. Perfectly safe? Are there side effects? Yes, there are. There can be, but safe enough to be acceptable for risk benefit for the right patient when they're eyes wide open, shared decision making in it together. Yes, I would say very, very comfortably. Do I have some patients who say I don't want it? Absolutely. Some patients say I'm not ready. I don't want to do it. I respect that. That's part of the relationship, and that's part of being an individual, right? We're not the numbers in the study. 86% of the patients achieved. It's like, okay, that's a percentage, but individual patient, you may say, that's not for me. That's not where I want to go. And that's why I'm so grateful to have other options, because up until a couple years ago, I really didn't. It was like, okay, I don't really have any more tricks in my toolbox, but now I do. So the JAK inhibitors are kind of an exciting, relatively new category of medicine that stands for Janus kinase inhibitors. And it turns out that those little cell messengers, we had talked about those interleukins, they go from cell to cell and they bind to these little receptors on top of the cell. But the next step, it's kind of like a relay race. They send the message, they get the baton, they have to pass it. The next step in that is inside the cell, and it's called the JAK-STAT system. That takes that message and then brings it to the nucleus, kind of the center of the cell, and then it changes the actual production of proteins and alters the cell activity. So you could block it at the cytokine level, but you could also have a small molecule that goes into the cell and blocks it at the JAK-STAT step. And so that's what the JAK inhibitors do. They block JAK, its ability to activate STAT and go into the nucleus. And in so doing, it turns out there are 4 members of the JAK family: JAK1, JAK2, JAK3, and TYK2. And they have different kind of associated receptors. And it turns out that JAK1 in particular deals with a lot of the things that we're interested in for atopic dermatitis. IL-4, IL-13, IL-31, this thing called TSLP, thymic stromal lymphopoietin. There's a bunch of them, and they kind of share this JAK1. So the ones that we're looking at for atopic dermatitis tend to be JAK1 selective. They have a bigger effect on JAK1. And in so doing, they work super fast. They get in the cells, they're tiny little molecules, and they're synthetic, they're not biologics. They're tiny little molecules. They can get right into the cells, and they can block this process so that the inflammation, the itch, and the skin barrier damage is dampened as well. In my experience, they have been more powerful and faster than the biologics, at least the ones we have. I mean, there could be other examples that are not so much. In fact, there was a third one that was being studied in the US that actually didn't get approved. It did not make approval in the United States. It is approved in Japan, maybe in Europe too, for atopic derm, but in the US they said no, the risk-benefit ratio wasn't good enough, and it was weaker. It was kind of a milder one, presumably a little bit safer, because it tends to be like any kind of weapon. The more powerful, the more dangerous, right? A very sharp sword is very dangerous. Kind of a dull sword, okay, it doesn't really. So this is the more powerful ones got accepted. But as that being said, these work very quickly, and they can be very durable too. The data shows like even at 52 weeks, these patients are doing much better. And because of the fact they're small molecules, they can be in a pill form. So we have pill forms and a topical form. There's a cream. And that's something that's really hard to do with a biologic. Is it impossible? Maybe not impossible, and there are some companies trying to figure this out, but because they're very fragile proteins, if you eat the antibody, your stomach just digests it. It doesn't get into you in the proper way. If you put it on your skin, they're big molecules. Your skin's like, no. So that's why it's kind of neat with the biologics. You tend to have to do a shot, but with these JAK inhibitors, you can do a pill or even topical. And the trade-off, though, is that for that power, for that speed, they tend to have more potential side effects because, in part, is because they're not quite as targeted, right? Those biologics are hitting one thing, but the JAKs are hitting a little bit bigger of a family. And some of those other aspects maybe are used for things like making your blood cells. So there are some of the white blood cells and red blood cells that can actually go down. For some patients, it turns out it's pretty darn rare with these specific medicines and the specific way we're using it, but there are reports people get anemic, they get lymphopenia, their white blood cell counts drop down. Your lipids, it can affect your lipids. Some people get high cholesterol or high triglycerides while they're on it. It can affect your liver, it can upset your liver. So we're watching these things. If you have an infection, like tuberculosis, heaven forbid, that's quiet, and you do this, you're suppressing part of the immune system. It could activate. So we're always checking these patients once a year at least to make sure they don't have hidden tuberculosis or hepatitis. So it's a little bit more intense than the biologics, which don't seem to have those kind of risks. They're more controlled. And in fact, one of the interesting things with the biologics is that they tend to show fewer infections while you're on it than when you're off it. So sometimes families will say to me, why are you saying it's not an immunosuppressant? I think it's an immunosuppressant. You're telling me it's blocking a part of the immune system. It's like, yes, but it turns out it's such a tiny part of the immune system. One of my favorite sort of proof in the pudding is just that your number of infection rate tends to go down, which is cool. And with the JAK inhibitors, it's a little bit different. The infection rate overall is a little bit lower, but there is still a risk of serious infection that's different when you're on a JAK inhibitor. So it's a trade-off, for certain patients. For the right patient, the trade-off is worth it. It's a slam dunk. But for some patients, it's like, I'm a little too nervous. And then there are sort of the longer term effects, things like blood clots. There's discussion of major adverse cardiovascular events like heart attacks and stroke. And then even cancer risk. There's an increased risk, a slightly increased risk of cancer on these medicines, again, because we're manipulating the immune system more broadly. The hard part is, having said all that, which makes them sound absolutely frightening to most patients at this point, they're like, the crazy thing is that if you were to compare it apples to something like prednisone or cyclosporin or azathioprine, some of these older medicines, my honest opinion is that it's way safer than those. The problem is we've sort of been indoctrinated into the fact that, prednisone, I've done a bunch of prednisone in my life, I've had a few courses, it's not a big deal. Many doctors, come on, it's fine. But actually, if you look, the risks for those is actually significantly higher. They're just so old that the data we have is kind of piecemeal. The FDA has never been stringent with it in the same way, but I truly believe, this is just speculation, but I truly believe this. If a company invented prednisone today, it would not make it through the FDA. They would say, no way. No way. This is way too dangerous. It's out. That's my honest opinion. But because it was invented in the 50s, we've had it for so long, we built our entire understanding around it. You could make a similar discussion too. I imagine if somebody invented the internal combustion engine today, we maybe already have some electric cars. I have a feeling people would say, are you crazy? You got to put petrol in the thing and it's smoky and all. You're crazy. We have electric cars. Why would you, right? But because we started there, people are very fierce. Like, wait, hey, I've used these. This is how we do it. This is how things get done. We have a gas station and it's crazy. But I think if you could subtract that, the internal combustion engine is crazy. It's got 10 times the number of parts, all these things to break down. You need a mechanic. You're doing emissions testing. It's literally belching out burning. You're burning something in the city. Somebody's walking behind you, smelling the bus fumes. Use an electric car. It's like totally different, right? Anyways, that's just my little commentary on it. But I think we can, our point of view is really shaped by where we started. I do. I think I've had enough patients tell me that they've seen TSW-like effects with the calcineurin inhibitors, tacrolimus, pimecrolimus, that I think there's something to it. My sense is that it seems like it's even rarer than the TSW proper, and it doesn't make as much sense to me because I kind of feel like the part of the TSW is about the vasoconstrictivity. It constricts the blood vessels, but I've heard it enough that I think that it's probably true. So I got to fix my understanding of what I think is going on, because we know that the calcineurin inhibitors, they don't affect the blood vessels in the same way, and they really are pretty different. I mean, they're still affecting the immune system broadly, but they're really pretty different than steroids. And so it feels weird to clump them together, but in a way, I think there's some truth to it. The question is what about as we go further along? Like, do we see things like that with dupilumab? Do we see things like that with crisaborole, the phosphodiesterase 4 inhibitor? My sense is no, or at least very, very, very rarely, or at least that if it is happening, it's maybe, again, it's talking to something different. There's some other immune issue. And that brings me to kind of one of my thoughts is that I think withdrawal is probably the wrong term for this, in part because I think in doctors' minds, it really can refer to something physiologic, right? So if I take somebody with, let's just take sort of a random person that has, let's just say poison ivy, right? They're normal, healthy, they're hanging out, they get poison ivy, it's rip-roaring red. If I give them a strong steroid and put it on for just like 2 days, they feel a little bit better. If you stop abruptly, it can come back with a vengeance, right? So you could kind of say, wow, that was with steroid withdrawal. You kind of damped down the immune system, but it was still really revved up. So as soon as you stop that too abruptly, it flared. And we especially see that with oral steroids. People do a short taper, way too short, or no taper. They'll just take 5 days, and then they'll call me. They'll say, the urgent care doc gave me just 5-day, a Medrol pack or something, and now I'm worse than I was when I went in. That is my kind of conception of a withdrawal. With TSW or TSWS, the topical steroid withdrawal syndrome, I'm trying to push that concept to make it a little bit more comprehensive. I feel that it's not a physiologic withdrawal because I have patients who've been struggling for 5 years, 7 years. That at this point now, I feel like it might be more useful to think about it that the immune system is broken in a way, like something bad has happened. This is not just a time issue. And that's important too, because I have a lot of patients who come in saying, I'm just going to wait this out. I'm going to keep waiting. I'm a warrior. I can do this. And I'm like, you are amazing. I can't believe you put up with it this long. But like, I don't know if it's going to go away. I don't know how anybody could know, right? Because all I'm really seeing are people that are year 2, year 5, year 7. It's like, so my sense is, can we do something? Obviously non-steroidal, but can we do something to help? And I think the answer is yes, maybe we can try to help. And again, some patients are all for it. Like, please, I'm willing to do anything. And some patients even are like, I'm willing to go back on steroids. And I'm like, let's not do that. But that tells you the amount of suffering these people are going through, right? So just to keep saying tough it out, it's an answer. I just think it's a crummy one, and I would love to avoid that. I mean, if I truly thought it was just a matter of time, then yeah, we could just do supportive care. But as far as I can tell, for some people at least, right? So that's the problem. And I can't predict. Or if I could predict, if I say, don't worry, I think it's just going to be a 6-month for you or a year. Okay, but I can't tell. So I think we have to do something. Now, that being said, let me be very clear. I can't help everybody. I try, but I really can't. So even trying, sometimes it's a failure. But at least we can sort of say, we tried, we really tried, and we keep trying. And as new things come, we're going to say, okay, let's try it. I mean, as I've gotten a couple of new topical agents that are technically right now for psoriasis. I've had a few patients try them, and I think maybe these can help. We have this IL-31 inhibitor, which is kind of the master itch cytokine. It's a biologic. It's called nemolizumab. I'm excited to try that. Maybe that will help. Part of it is we don't fully understand the dang immune system. It's complicated. So things that we think we understand, and you try it and you say, oh my goodness, this actually helped. But I think we need all the tools we can to at least try for people who are willing to, obviously. And if patients say, no, I'm not going to, how can I push it? I'm not going to push them into something they don't want to do. But I would like to at least keep offering things, at least keep trying, because otherwise we know, we've already seen it. The one lesson we know is it's miserable and it can go on for an extremely long time, maybe indefinitely. There might not be a natural end for some of the patients. And I don't know why. And I don't know how to predict that. There, we talk about kind of the history of medicine and how there was a period where the doctor was very paternal and sort of said, take 2 of these, call me in the morning, this is how we do it. And the patient was not really very much involved. And I think that era is fortunately over. It's not right. And I think we're seeing an increasing need to have a shared decision-making process. That being said, patients often start this process in different places. Some people are very well informed. Other people really don't know and feel overwhelmed by stuff. They say, can you just tell me what to do? And I like to try then to figure out, meet them where they need to be met and work together. I think the other piece is that it can be threatening. There is a certain personality that feels very threatened when they're questioned. And, unfortunately, I think it can reflect insecurity, right? Just like any other kind of human endeavor, if somebody starts questioning you and you're feeling insecure, you can snap and get defensive. And it takes a certain kind of patience and a certain kind of confidence to say, that's a great question. Let's talk about why I want to do this or why I think this might help you. And I think it's hard to compensate for everybody just from knowledge. Some of that is personality types, and people that are particularly, I think, old enough to have maybe practiced in an era when they're used to just their word is the word. And when they get questioned, they feel that, and that can be tough. The best I can say for that is sometimes it's hard to change people, so it may be worth just finding another connection, to say, okay, I don't think this is a good fit, and I think that's okay. I think that's actually more than okay. Finding a healthcare provider that matches you and feels right is maybe the most important thing of all. Obviously, if it's a small thing, one visit, you have a spot you want them to look at, doesn't matter much. But when it's a chronic condition like atopic dermatitis or TSW syndrome, you want somebody who's going to be able to be there for the journey. Because at the end of the day, every person is a little bit different in their journey. And so the only way we're really going to get through it is by learning and changing and adapting to each other. And if you just have a one-size-fits-all, I don't think it's going to help most people. Insurance has been one of the most difficult things in my career, and it is so challenging because they are a third party shoved into this relationship, right? We always talk about the patient-doctor relationship, but really it's a love triangle. There's a patient, doctor, insurer, and the insurance company is tough because their entire model is to ostensibly help patients cover their healthcare needs, which is great. I mean, you literally can't pay for the stuff yourself. No one could. I mean, I don't care how rich you may be. Jeff Bezos could pay for it out of pocket. But other than that, all you need is all you have to do is break an arm, and you have a hospital with the radiologist and all the staff, and they help. I mean, it's thousands of dollars. So that's what the purpose of insurance is, of course. But they also become this unwitting influencer in our relationship because things that I want to do are deemed necessary. In the old days, that was it. The doctor said, the prescription is a legal document that says this is medically necessary. Well, now we have this third party. Well, is it really necessary? Is this what you really want? Have you tried these other things? So they're playing this role to cut costs. I get it. I understand it's a business, and this is that very ugly interface between capitalism, business, and medicine, which is not really a business, right? Especially when you're the patient. It's very cool when you're wearing your slick suit and you're a CEO of a healthcare company. Yes, we're making a lot of money here. Yeah, but when it's you, well, no, I want to talk to the doctor. I want to have someone to sit with me and hold my hand and take me through, it's very different. So this is this very ugly interface. And of course, we're in the middle of it, which stinks. And the patients often get very angry with us, with me or my office staff, usually not with me because I'm a dodo. They're like, I know you didn't do it. I'm going to scream at your front desk staff or scream at your office manager because it didn't get covered or something. And it's so tough because we also then are up against kind of a nameless corporation. We're on hold. And I've done more calls than I can ever tell you where I'm sitting on hold like a dodo for 40 minutes and getting transferred and da-da-da. And then finally, the worst is the slap in the face as you get to the final person and you say, listen, I need this for the patient. And I can't tell you how many times after all that, I've wasted half a morning. They'll say, oh yeah, no, everything's fine. It's all in. It's all approved. No sweat. And I'm like, so what was this? What? And I think part of it is just obstacles because you realize that, and I'm not ascribing malintent to all insurance companies. I'm sure there are companies that are trying to help. I'm sure they must be out there. But we all understand that their business model is that by keeping costs down, they make more money, right? That's the whole model. So their incentive is to not cover stuff easily and to make it a little harder. And sometimes just putting a few more walls, that's big savings because if a patient really doesn't need something or can get by without it, great, they win. So that being said, I'm not trying to besmirch any particular insurance company or the industry, but it is something patients have to be aware of, and I really try to empower my patients to rise up because at the end of the day, I'm just the guy costing the insurance company money. You would think the doctor would have some kind of power over it. We have very little. I mean, I'm just one of the bazillion providers. But the patient, they're the customer, right? They actually carry a little bit more power because they're paying for the service. This is their insurance company. So I usually try to get them involved. I say, please call, please write. And for some insurance companies, it turns out they actually have a separate pathway. If the patient themselves expresses, a problem or an issue, they actually have to go a different group that will help mitigate that. So I use that essentially 100% of the time when it's something important like this. I mean, these are not, it's one thing if it's a acne cream and they have another one on formulary, fine, we can use it, we can start the other. It's not a big deal. But when it's something that's, I think, is really important for a patient who's failed a bunch of stuff or has TSW, and then, say, well, you have to use steroids on this patient first. It's like, now you're out of line. Now you're overstepping, because I'm the 6th dermatologist they've seen, and we've already documented, so I want the patient involved. And I think that unfortunately falls onto the patients who are already stressed out and burned out and tired, but it makes a difference if they can become active and push against the insurance company. I really do think that's part of why I'm so effective, because my patients do a lot of the work for me. I'm like, please get involved. I'll write my letter. I'm going to call too, but I need your help. And when they do that, I can get almost anybody what they need, which is really great. I feel lucky. When I talk to colleagues, they're like, how do you do that? Well, I can't get anything covered. You'll hear people say that, and I think that also adds to burnout and makes doctors feel really helpless. And I think it also reinforces bad behavior of just saying, triamcinolone's covered, just keep using it. I can't deal with this stuff, right? All the things are pushing against us. Talk about everything against the flow, right? We need to fix this. We need to make it so that if triamcinolone is not working and the steroids are causing trouble, it's like, all right, well, maybe we should try something else. And because you've tried this, obviously, and it's not doing well for you or it's hurt you, we need to do something different, and it should go through. But I think it will, again, it'll take a movement. Unfortunately, these days, everything kind of takes a movement, but that's just the way it is. We just have to rise to it. I think from our standpoint, the best things are coming in prepared, and most of my TSW patients are incredibly prepared. They have all their notes. They're amazing. But healthcare as a whole, I think a lot of patients come in and they're like, did you get the facts from my other doctor? Do you know about the thing? And you realize how broken the system is. And I always tell the story. My dad, he had an eye doctor in Florida. And then when he kind of is a snowbird, Illinois to Florida. And he was going to see somebody in Illinois. And I said, do me this favor. Get your records yourself. It's not many, it's a couple office notes. Carry them physically with you to the appointment. He's like, why? They faxed them. They sent it over. Don't they have electronic? I said, just trust me on this. And sure enough, he was laughing. He said, I went in, I said, did you get the notes? No, we never got anything. He said, I have them right here, and handed it. And there wasn't anything that complex. We didn't need to, spend 6 months to chart dive or to, do all these things. He just needed to know a couple of things, and that was that. So part of that being prepared helps. I think part of it is being ready to help advocate for yourself too, be it with that person in the room to say, actually, I'm not comfortable with this, I'd like to go a different way, or with the insurance company when that comes up. So being willing to lend a hand to get where we need to go and make those decisions we make together, shared decisions, and then shared execution, kind of working together to do it. And I think just communicating, letting us know when something's not right, and letting us know if something doesn't feel good or seems like it's going the wrong direction. That's important, because a lot of times patients just kind of feel like, well, maybe this is what's supposed to happen. Maybe I'm supposed to be miserable and this is just all part of it. And then I'll meet that patient later and they're like, gosh, I wish I would have said something sooner. I wish I would have gone back. They had 11 refills and I thought I was just supposed to keep going. So asking those questions is key. There are different guidelines by state boards, but it's quite a bit. I think for Illinois, it's on the order of like 150 continuing medical education hours has to be accrued every time we renew our license. I'm lucky because I do a lot of education stuff and I'm involved in a lot. I mean, I tend to blast through it very quickly, but there's no doubt some docs kind of have to do it at the last minute, but there's a lot of options. And the truth is, and I don't know if I necessarily change it because, there's so many, everything's so onerous as it is. I hate to add more, but it is true. You can kind of pick what you want to some degree, so long as they're accredited. And I do wish that there was a little bit more, of a broad spectrum that people could sample from, because I think that, for example, if you're more cosmetically oriented, you could get almost all of your education in cosmetic or skin cancer, and you might not dabble much into this. And so it would be cool if you could have a little bit more. But of course, this is exacerbated 100-fold as soon as you leave dermatology, because again, if you're a primary care doctor or family practice doctor, maybe you could do a little education in derm, but you tend to have to be self-motivated. And again, that might be the least pressing of your whole thing, because right now maybe you have a lot of people with bad diabetes, and so it's like, I need to focus on diabetes and catch up on some of these new things, these new pumps and new technology and new, right? So you feel bad for those patients. And that's why I think I'm never, I try to be really generous and not too critical of people that are not in dermatology for not knowing all this stuff, because I can't keep up. Like, I don't even do cosmetics or skin cancer. I'm like super focused on inflammatory stuff and I can't keep up. And I'm a spaz. So I keep thinking, like, if I'm crazy and thinking and reading and all stuff and I can't keep up, I can't imagine if this is not your area of interest, how are you supposed to keep up with all this stuff? Yeah, I'm a nerd. I'm an eczema nerd. And even as an eczema nerd, I can't really keep up with everything. So imagine if you're mostly focused on melanoma, right? Which is important, or you're mostly focused on acne, acne expert, or hidradenitis suppurativa, terrible, or you're a hair loss expert or a nail expert, but you're seeing some of these patients. It's like, how much should they be able to know? And this is the problem. And this is that balance of like over experts, which can also be destructive if everybody's too siloed, but also the vastness and richness and complexity of some of the things we're talking about that we all live and breathe. Anybody watching this you've been thinking about this and reading about it, talking about it, but for random person at a bar, they're going to be like, wait, what? Like, what are you talking? I don't even know anything about this. I don't know about these medicines. I don't know about any of this stuff. So there's this a very wide spectrum of knowledge. Yes, I mean, it already is to some degree. It's starting because as we write scholarly papers and as we quote them and as we put them in the guidelines, which is already happening, it's starting to appear as a diagnostic entity and things, it will automatically enter the curriculum. And of course, part of the curriculum, it's not like the old days, there's not a textbook or anything. Part of it is they rotate through. A lot of medical school education is coming through offices. So I see a lot of medical students come from the local schools and they hear it from me directly. So it's already there. It just needs to get broader and more important. And I think the next big step, I think it'll be really an historic moment, is when we get a diagnostic criteria that is in a medium to high tiered, high powered journal that gets out there. That'll be big, and it'll be interesting. It'll be something to watch. You get your popcorn and watch, because there'll be some letters to the editor. There's going to be some stuff. It'll be intense, but if we can get it out there, I think that'll be the tipping point for a lot of stuff, because at the very least, I know my patients will carry it with them. They'll print it out and be like, here you go. Because I've had patients tell me they said they never heard of it. And I'm like, all right, come on. I'm like, so I give them my papers or other papers, like Belinda Sherry's great papers. I'm like, here it is. It's laid out. These aren't obscure journals. What do you need to hear of something? Here you go. It's a thing. But when you have it in a mainstream journal with a diagnostic criteria, it's like, oh, it looks like it's time for a little continuing medical education. Here you go. This is eligible for one hour of continuing medical education credit. You should put that on your thing. Don't you need some? You don't have to really say that, but I think that would be powerful if we can put it in a big journal. That's one of the hardest things. I think the most important thing is connecting well with the provider and really making them understand that while you don't want to do steroids, you still want to treat the child. I think the hardest part, and I mentioned this is a real thing, some families don't want to do anything. And I think that's really tough because it puts us all in this very, very tough position. I understand it. I don't think it's crazy. I really don't. But I think that in the current setup of the world, I think that enough people are going to say that this is not right, that we have some treatments we should be trying. And it's sort of cruel and unusual to say we don't want to do anything, we're going to wait it out or just let the baby suffer. Because again, as we said, 100% chance of suffering, misery, potential lasting damage to the child. And it's one of those things that's like, it's a hard point. It's like, as a parent, you have a lot of rights and you have a lot of flexibility, but it's weird if you don't think that there's stuff to learn. Like it seems strange if you feel like I know. It's like, that's scary. That kind of sort of certainty is a little spooky. And I think that's going to make people call. They're going to say, well, this person feels that they have the answer to this, and the patient's miserable and the baby's crying. Like, so I think you have to be a little bit flexible. I mean, the world is crazy. People abuse their terrible things happen. So at some point, what can I say? But I just think that the right thing, at least in my mind in 2023, is that we should be trying stuff for these kids. And I think that if you say you're willing to try other things besides steroids, I don't think you'll ever get in serious trouble with that. But I think if you say we're not going to do anything, we're just going to wait it out, or we think everything's too dangerous, I think that many people will call Child Protective Services, because it does seem that you're really potentially putting the child at harm. But I agree that it's complex, and I agree that I don't have all the answers either. So it's just a matter of that Overton window, what the majority of people, I think, would say. Yeah, I think, again, it's probably case by case to some degree, and part of it is how the parents, comport themselves and interact with people. I think I don't think anybody enjoys that kind of a setup, right? I'm getting stressed just talking about it, thinking about it, I'm starting to sweat. No one wants to be in that position, right? Because it's literally people trying to help, right? Like, literally they're trying to help. And, we could tell some story. The world is so divided right now and so polar. It's almost hard to make up a situation, but like you could tell a story where it's like a little kid falls and breaks his arm and the bone is protruding and an infection is starting. Something really extreme and obvious, and they go to the grocery store and everyone's saying, oh my goodness, like, are you doing anything for that? Oh, well, we're using a special kind of family healing that we use. We like to, I don't know, we like to do a special ritual at home and we believe this will heal it. I don't know. What can I say? Maybe they can. Maybe they have a power. Maybe they do. But because we continue to see this and we see the kid getting sicker and the infection happening, at some point we would say, we think that at that point as a society, we want to try to intervene on behalf of the child, even though it does question your parental rights. That's a super extreme version just to kind of help, hopefully, again, maybe not even extreme enough. Some people say, wait, that's really what we do. In which case, I don't know what to tell you because everybody's a little bit different. But I think we're trying to protect, right? So at that point, now you might say the doctors hurt the kid or screwed it up or made it worse, possible. But the way I think we agree as a society is that we have to try something. We have to be at least trying to help when we think we can help. And so I think that's the piece. So working with them, being agreeable, trying stuff out, getting other opinions, and on a case-by-case basis. I think, honest to God, I could tell you this. If the herbs were helping and the kid cleared up, I think it would all disappear. People would not bother you. Part of the problem is people are doing other things and the kid's still pretty miserable and suffering and everybody's, so I think that's part of it. And so I will tell you this, that I've had parents where we're doing everything, heavy duty, serious drugs, hardcore stuff, and the patient's still suffering, and they've been told by the pediatrician, we're gonna look into this. And they're like, wait, we're literally doing everything. We have them on like the strongest stuff, cyclosporin and all these things. So even in those situations when we're doing everything that can be done, and I brought patients to grand rounds where multiple derm opinions, people sent up to Mayo Clinic, this kind of thing, there are people that we can't get better, right? So, but even those patients, I think, face it. So to me, probably the gold standard is, can we get you better? And if you can find a way to get better without needing anything conventional, oh, I love it, I'm in heaven, that's what I want. And if herbs are helping, perfect. But it's for those patients where things aren't getting better. And that's, I think, the real test, where they're saying, hey, we're doing this, but it's like, but it's not helping, so can you please get some conventional people involved? And is it perfect? No, it's terrible. I wish we were, those situations are just terrible for all. Everybody loses there, right? I wish people understood that it is very tough to sometimes do all that we want to do in a short period of time. The way dermatology has been structured is to be pretty fast-paced, and in part that's because we do represent a very small section of medicine. We're about 1% of all physicians, and so we try to take care of as many people as we can, and we kind of are built on a very fast model, but that makes it really tough for complex patients. And so there's that tension we all face. I'm very lucky. I have a big practice where I am able to take a little bit more time and do some stuff. Again, it's my hobby and interest, so I feel lucky that I'm able to do that. But for many, they only have a little slice, especially if you work for a big company. We have these groups that get bought out, and it's like, come on, you got to go. You're kind of you're a cog in the wheel. So it's really tough, and I do think that we have to try to work as best we can with the constraints that we're given. So for me, integrative medicine can be defined in a couple of different ways, but the way I like to think about it is taking the best of both worlds. I like to take the best of conventional modern medicine with our evidence base and our science, as best we can, but I like to marry that with different traditions, different approaches, and maybe a little bit more of anecdote or evidential experience where people have said this has really helped and this is something we can use. My favorite is to find things that play well together, that can really support each other and get some synergy between them. And I love being able to use these other treatments and other approaches to sort of minimize the need for conventional medicine. And I feel like we can do that sometimes, and when we do it, it's incredibly gratifying to be able to use a little bit of both worlds, and sometimes not even have to lean on the conventional medicines at all. We can actually kind of wean people off of them or minimize them. So that's my way of thinking about it, and it really is a more holistic approach. It's thinking about botanicals, it's thinking about mind-body, it's thinking even about kind of the woo stuff. I like energy medicine. I'm interested in that. I actually think there's something to it, so the power of those modalities is, I think it's real, and it's just a matter of kind of harnessing it and sometimes convincing skeptics who think it's all crazy. Yes, I think there is a push towards integrative medicine in general. We're seeing lots of patients ask for it, demand it, seek it out, and we sort of help build this community, because one of the problems is a few years ago there really wasn't much of a community in dermatology doing this. So a few of us put our heads together and said, what if we could actually help create the community? What if we could sort of be the person we want this place to be, right? Be the change. And so we started this thing called the Integrative Dermatology Certificate Program, where we have dermatologists come and spend a number of months getting deep down into the weeds of this and talking about these techniques and practices and bringing experts from all these different areas. And it's been incredibly successful. We're in our 4th year now. And so we kind of feel like we're actually helping to create this group of colleagues that we want to collaborate with, we want to learn from, we want to work with, we want to refer patients to. So it's been really exciting. And then, of course, we have a thing called the Integrative Dermatology Symposium. Again, multiple people from different traditions, acupuncturists, herbalists, nutritionists, they get to come, we get to talk together. And that to me is magical. That's something that I've never seen before. That doesn't really happen in conventional medicine and really can only happen sort of adjacent to it at this point. But the movement is growing, and I love to see the enthusiasm, the excitement, and just this real powerful movement happening and building. There are a number of barriers to integrative approaches. They're everything from time, because if you're going to do acupuncture, you generally need to be with somebody in a room for 30 to 45 minutes or maybe even longer, and that's really tough. It can be from the practicality of getting it. If you're going to do an herbal treatment, where do you get those herbs? How do you source them? How do you use them? How do you explain it to the patient? It can be even cost. To bill for time as a dermatologist, it's very easy. We click a box, this is what we did today, and that's fine. But if you're going to now do something different, the insurance company's like, well, wait a minute, this is different. How do you capture that? And some people kind of have split offices or split practices. Some people just kind of throw it in there. It's complicated. We don't have a great way of doing it. Part of it is pushback from colleagues. They'll say, wait a minute, this isn't, what did you put them on? You put them on coconut oil? That's not in the guidelines. I never saw that. And so there is a little bit of this fear of being ridiculed or even retribution. And so there's it's a complicated time. But I do think that for many people, a little bit of this is very, very much tenable, and they can do a little bit. And I think as we see society moving towards wanting more of this, it becomes increasingly okay. And I think we're seeing more acceptance of it broadly. Yes, I would say there probably is no universally safe way to use steroids. I think that there honestly are patients for whom a tiny exposure was enough to cause trouble. And if we are really trying to get zero trouble, then you can't use them. You know what I mean? You just can't. But that being said, I do think that a good general rule of thumb, in my experience, and I'm still learning, right? I mean, you have to be, I'm humbled all the time by this kind of stuff. But my general rule of thumb is that intermittent use, taking breaks, generally speaking, will help prevent it, but more importantly, will help alert us to when things are going wrong. So what I talk about is using it for maybe up to a week, maybe up to 2 weeks. I'm a little bit more conservative. So usually I'm telling patients 3 to 5 days of use, twice daily of your steroid for up to a week, and then taking a break and going with either nothing if you're fine. It might be just like moisturizer or a non-steroidal agent. Maybe it's crisaborole, or maybe it's a calcineurin, whatever it is, to use that to any remaining spots. And then I'm going to follow up in 4 to 6 weeks, and I'm going to ask them how much time have they spent. And what I'm really looking for, so the best case, and what happens for a lot of milder patients, is they're like, doc, I only needed the steroid for like 2 or 3 days, and I haven't used it since. Great, congrats, you're awesome, you rock. Call me if you need me, right? We're golden. They barely used it, they're not going to need it. We're golden, easy. Second best case is they say, I used it for a bit. It took me about 5 days. I was better. I took a break. I got 3 or 4 days off. I maybe used the other stuff, or maybe didn't. Maybe I just moisturized. Then I came back. I used it again for a few days, but now I'm pretty good. Okay, pretty good. Let's keep an eye on you. You're not ready to go home yet, but we'll watch you. Worst case, either I used it for the full week, still wasn't better. I kept using it. I've been using it for the entire time since I've seen you, and I'm like, okay, whoa, that's red light. Whoa. Or right below that is I used it. It got better after just a few days. As soon as I stopped, though, doc, it was back the next day. So I basically need to continuously use it to stay better, right? So first case, we couldn't get it better at all. That's terrible. Second case is just behind that. They're better, but only when they're using it essentially every day. Red light. We got to stop. We got to do something different. That's bad. And then the third bad situation would be like one of those earlier cases now coming back maybe in a few months saying, remember at first I was barely using it. Now I'm needing it more and more. And can I have a stronger one? That the triamcinolone or the hydrocortisone 2.5 isn't enough. Can I go up to the mometasone? Do you have any beta? No. Something's wrong. We got to stop it. I think that if we are paying attention at those moments, we're going to catch it. and be able to avoid the vast majority. All? No, I don't think we can stop it all. There's going to be some bad stuff that happens, but really help a lot? Yeah, a lot. And I think we're going to prevent most of it. And I honestly think that most really good dermatologists do some version of that, whether or not they would admit it quite this way or tell it the same way, but I really think they would do something similar. And that's why you'll hear some really, really smart, really, really good clinicians say, I don't see this. Why? I don't believe in this thing because I don't ever see it. And it might be in part because they're pretty careful. And so they're not getting people into these really yucky situations in the first place. And so, you know what I mean? It's kind of like if you're really meticulously clean, you might not have roaches in your apartment. And it's like, doesn't mean roaches don't exist. And it doesn't mean they can't come from next door. But if you're really meticulous, you're probably less likely to ever see a cockroach. And so I think not zero, but low. And that's part of why I think good people sometimes are denying it or questioning the whole existence of this entity. Right, the issue with steroids are that they're incredibly reliable. Almost every single patient, a novel patient, obviously, we're not saying people that have had trouble with them, but should get improvement quickly. They're some of the most powerful treatments we have. So even in refractory cases, like I often use them as my second or third line. If I'm like, I can't even turn this off, we're doing everything. Steroids usually, they work. And then they're incredibly accessible, they're cheap. So I have patients that have no insurance or are struggling and they say, well, I paid out of pocket for one of these calcineurin inhibitors. It was $300 and it didn't even help that much, or it stung and burned. Doc, what do I do? And it's like, I can give only so many samples that I have. I give you, here's the whole box is all they gave me, but that's not sustainable, so that's why, again, you say, well, the steroids are $4 or $10 at the drugstore. They can get what they need to get them better. So we see why it's so tough. It's locked in there. It's like, this is a hard problem to solve. And then especially if the alternative is a $40,000 a year biologic, you can imagine the insurance companies being like, wait a minute, so $4 versus $40,000 in perpetuity, you got to prove to me that they really had trouble with this one. I mean, you get it. It makes sense. It's not, it's not that we're saying it's $4 to $6. It's orders and orders of magnitude. I would just add that I feel for the families and the patients who are struggling with this, and I know that they feel alone, and I'm so grateful for the community and for things like this that make people realize that they're not alone. The most frustrating thing for me, sometimes I go from room to room to room privately talking to people who all feel alone, and I'm thinking, gosh, I wish you could have met the family next door. Like, they're in the same position. So this is a way we can bring each other together and rely on each other and support each other, and I would argue that is pretty much the meaning of life, helping each other out.